Which one are you using first, Kristen?
I will probably do the SIP first.
Okay.
All right, so can everyone at home first hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank
we can.
Yes.
Yay, I like having more responses than none. So today we're going to talk about the seller license to remain in possession and the residential lease after sale. These are common documents that are associated with one of the most common situations in a residential transaction, commonly referred to as a leaseback or a rent-back. Why do you think this situation is so common? Or maybe I should explain it first. A leaseback is when a seller stays in the property after the transaction closes. Why would this be common?
Because they need the money from the sale to purchase something
Or do whatever it
else.
is they need to do their next
Yes.
chapter. Yeah. The seller needs the money before they can do what they need to do next. And until they know they're getting that money, they don't finalize the plans for that next step. Makes sense, right? It makes fun of me because I just do this in my whole class. So there are two types of leasebacks. One is a formal lease. One is seller remaining in possession. They're very similar, but one very, very significant difference is a leaseback that requires a residential lease after sale is for 30 or more days. Okay. And in the state of California, once someone occupies a property for 30 or more days, they become a tenant and they have tenant protections. So when I do work with a leaseback in my transaction, no matter who I'm representing, I would prefer to keep the leaseback for a period of 29 or fewer days. Because in theory, if the seller were to stay longer, the buyer, now new owner, could simply have them removed for trespassing. They would be able to turn off utilities and change the locks. Okay. Once they have tenant protections, whether or not they're paying, they have to go through formal eviction process to get rid of the former owner sellers. Okay. Now, is this always possible? No, sometimes they need 30 or more days. However, a lender, if the buyer is purchasing with a loan, a lender might not allow more than 30 days. They might not allow more than 45. It is very, very rare that they allow more than 45. So if you're ever considering including a leaseback as part of the terms of your transaction, you need to check with the lender to see how long they're okay with the seller leasing back from the new owner. Yes.
Most are limited to 60 days.
Not in my professional experience. Most are limited to under 45. Depends on the lender specifically. But it's not up to us. It's up to buyers, lenders, I guess what I'm trying to say. And like I said, from a buyer perspective, anything more than 29 days could be risky, right? What if the seller doesn't leave? What if their plans fall through? Then you have to go through eviction. I have never had this happen, thankfully. I have had a seller leave a couple of days late, but we huffed and we puffed and they left. Why do you think that a bank would have an issue with a leaseback of more than 30, 45, or 60 days? You want to answer?
The reason behind it is Fannie Freddie typically requires the new homeowner to occupy within 60 days.
Because it's a primary residence loan with lower rate, lower down payment. If they were making a loan on a home that they thought was going to be rented, they would have had a different interest rate. It would have been a different loan program product. And they probably would have had to put more money down. Okay. Lenders see investment property as higher risk than primary residence property. And this is why. Right, so we're going to look at the forms for the leaseback. First, we'll look at SIP, seller license to remain in possession. And remember, this is intended for possession of 29 days or less. Okay, it says it right here. When would you fill this out?
When the seller wants the.
Well, providing a leaseback can be negotiated once you open a transaction, but most of the time it should be negotiated in the offer or counter offer process. Okay. There's an inherent problem with that, though. Most of the time, the buyer, who will be the new owner, wants compensation for the time that the seller, past owner, previous owner, is looking to live in the house. And that is because they are paying their, what, PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And if it's a condo, HOA dues. So why would the buyer, new owner, pay for the seller, past owner, to live in the property? Well, sometimes they will pay for it as a term of their offer. Okay, but most of the time, no. And most of the time, the compensation they're seeking, it's not a flat per diem rate. It is usually their actual carrying cost, that PITI figure. We will not know what that PITI figure is until close to the close of escrow. So if that dollar amount needs to be included in the SIP and the RLAS, it creates a problem for us. So when I am negotiating a seller leaseback at the time of offer or counter offer, let me see if I can find this language for you. Gosh, what's one I did it on? Who did I do a lease back for? I have to think about this. Someone remind me to find you the language I use. I don't actually use an SIP or RLAS when I'm negotiating at time of offer or counter offer. I have concocted some pretty extensive language stipulating that the buyer and seller will execute an SIP or RLAS, whichever is necessary, reflecting the actual figure that escrow will calculate for us closer to the close of escrow. And I say that this document is to be, mutually executed a certain number of days prior to the close of escrow. Does that make sense? I can't fill out a document that I don't have the basic terms for. That's contract law in the state of California. And one of those basic terms is how much consideration is an exchange for that lease back. Does that make sense? Tell me no, if not. Yes, no?
Who figures out the lease back?
Who figures out the PITI actual carrying costs?
Yes.
So I usually have escrow do it the way I write it in, because things can change. The reason we don't know is because the buyer doesn't know if they're purchasing with a loan, what their carrying costs, are going to be, because they don't know what exact dollar amount they're going to borrow. They don't know what their exact rate is going to be at the start of an escrow. We don't have a rate lock usually, right? The buyer doesn't know what the rate's going to be. There's no way to calculate this actual cost until closer to the close of escrow. Also, if we negotiate any price reductions, if we negotiate credits, we might negotiate a massive credit. The buyer could buy down their rate with some of that money. I mean, there are a lot of things that could change financially in the transaction that will affect the PITI figure. Let me see if I can just find this language. I think it's so important. No, I wrote one in an offer. I know what I can do. Okay. Sorry, guys at home, I will share my screen with you so you can just follow along with what I'm doing here.
Just like losing everything.
Sounds like me. Know what I'm doing anymore. Um. Let's see. They thought they might need one. Let's see.
Screen is frozen.
Okay. Can you see disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Right now, I'm just searching for a transaction where I think I offered the seller a lease back. I can't find it quickly here.
I have a question
Move on to something else.
already.
Yeah. Here we go.
What-
Yeah, look at that brain. It's still working sometimes.
Oh, you're on the
It's in the bottom.
RPA now?
Yeah, I'm gonna paste this. I'm gonna put this up for you guys.
Where did I put it in the?
I'm like,
Under other terms or an addendum if I need to.
To know that.
I'm gonna put it up on the screen now.
thinking I have my laptop.
Yeah, or you can put it on an addendum or in a counter offer. Okay, guys at home with the screen share, do you see my Word document?
No.
Yes, we do. Yeah, I saw it.
I see it.
Okay, great.
What's in the chat?
I'm gonna put it in the chat box.
You don't see it.
You don't see buyer to provide seller? No?
Mm.
How do I make this?
We see the screen for the car form, but if you have like a separate one from
Thank
that up, it's not showing.
I do, and it's supposed to follow my screen. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we see it.
Okay, great. And it's pasted into the chat box, guys. Okay, so this is modifiable, but because of that fundamental problem of not knowing what figure the PITI is going to be, and I had been offering a long close on this one, so you can't use this per se verbatim. It has to make sense for your situation. So buyer to provide seller with up to 29-day lease back at buyer's actual PITI carrying costs. Seller shall notify buyer at least 15 days prior to close in writing if they choose to exercise this option. That was different. It wasn't that they had to execute by this time. It was that they had to let my buyer know, because my buyer needed to know, when does she need to give notice at her apartment, how to set up moving stuff. So notification, we didn't know if they needed one yet, right? In the case where I know the seller needs one, I'm not going to have this language in here where it says the seller will notify the buyer if they're going to exercise. If we know they're exercising, that sentence does not apply, right? Buyer and seller agree to execute car form SIP within 2 days of this notification. Seller shall cover the cost of all home maintenance during any period of lease back. This is important because in both RLAS and SIP, besides the actual dollar amount for what the seller will be providing to the buyer for this lease back period, is who's responsible for maintenance, utilities. Also, it covers security deposit. In this instance, I don't think that my buyer cared about security deposit, but this is because it's a financial term and it hasn't been negotiated. It could be very important and it should be addressed in this language. Okay, so if my buyer wants a security deposit from the seller, it should be addressed here. When you leave vague or undefined terms in any part of the contract, you open yourself up to the failure to negotiate where no party is at fault, right? Because nobody has a claim. We didn't stipulate. So if you need something like, if the buyer had wanted the seller to give a security deposit during this leaseback period, that also would need to be added here. You know, seller shall provide buyer with a security deposit in the amount of blank dollars. Does that make sense? And how do you know what should go in here? Well,
Christine, can I move that chair?
Yeah.
Does it have to be the actual PITI or can it be any?
it can be any dollar amount, but the most common is PITI. No one's trying to make money, and this is just usually a situation that that arises. Also, what if you use a flat rate and it's not enough to carry the buyer's or cover the buyer's carrying costs? They're not going to be too pleased with you, right?
Escrow keep this money, right?
Well, sometimes it depends on how you filled it out. We'll talk about it. Good question, though. Okay, so you're gonna say this is an addendum to something, whatever it is. Okay, if that's a purchase agreement, seller counteroffer, buyer counteroffer, other, you know, I would think that other amendment to existing terms, if you're doing it after you open escrow, is going to be probably the most accurate, right? Because we cannot change anything that's already defined in the contract without having an amendment. So it's not an addendum. We no longer are adding to the purchase agreement or seller counteroffer if you're doing it in the situation like how I just showed you I do it. That is how you do it most of the time. That is the most common method of doing it. So at that point, I'm going to draft an amendment of existing terms. So I check this box other. I say amendment of existing terms, whatever date that amendment is, I put here. And on that amendment, I'd say see attached SIP form. Does that make sense?
So if we already have okay, let's say we have the counter offer. I'm just actually right now, I'm going through something like that. And the seller just gave us a counter offer because he's not sure when his Encino house is going to be ready before he's selling this house that we're giving the offer on. So should I send him now? He sent me a counter offer with all the details, like.
Well, it depends on what you and your clients decide. If you guys want to charge him a flat rate or you don't want to charge him at all, no problem to fill this out now. However, if you don't know how long he's going to, if your buyer doesn't know how much they want to charge, and it is, like I said, it's most common to charge the buyer's actual carrying costs to the seller. Well, then you'll have to use the language like I just put up on the screen.
And is an addendum.
Not yet. You would just counter his counter using the language I gave you, unless his language is clean and good. I doubt it. Right? I doubt that it's thorough. Or you guys just figure out a dollar amount. And if it's under 29 days, you'd use this form. And so you'd counter back and say, see attached SIP form or see attached RLAS form. And you just fill these out and attach it to the counter offer. Yeah, it all depends. It's all situational. There's no one way to do it. But the most common way that I'm talking about to do it correctly, most people do it incorrectly when they're encountering the common situation that I'm trying to share with you. They will fill this out and they will leave the dollar amount blank, or they'll write PITI in there. Well, California contract law says PITI is not a value. Therefore, I have an invalid contract. So if I wrote PITI in here, my SIP is invalid, which is why I use the language I put up on the screen for you guys. Because I'm saying we're going to execute an SIP. I'm putting the terms in the contract. But this further contract is an extension of the terms I negotiate in my offer or counter offer. And this is legally binding because at the time I complete this document and everyone signs it, we will have the dollar amount. So it will be a valid contract. Does that, I know that this is pretty advanced. We're at the end of our session. I just don't want you to get yourself into trouble by putting PITI in here or leaving this blank. I think this is one of the biggest errors in the California documents is how do we have a number? You know, industry standard is that that number is going to be PITI, which is not a number.
So, okay, so what you wrote is actually much better in the counter offer than to get to this because we really don't know what the number would be.
Yeah, unless you guys just want to like aim high and expect the seller to pay more. Okay, seller, but we don't know what the PITI is going to be. So our best guesstimate is this. We're going to ask for a little bit more to be on the safe side. So as long as you're willing to pay blank per day, we'll execute the SIP or the RLAS, whichever it is you need. And you should go, if you can figure that out and everybody will agree to it, as long as you feel like, you know, it's safe for your client understands, or if you feel like it's in your client's favor and they accept that, then you can go ahead and do the RLAS or the SIP with the offer or any counter offer. Okay, but just work, you know, like word of caution, just aim high. You know, who are you going to work with to get this number? Buyers, lending professional, and escrow. Okay, you need what their new projected tax rate's going to be, right? PITI stands for principal, interest, so that information you get from the lender, taxes, and insurance. Okay, so escrow will have a pretty good idea of taxes. They generally have a pretty good idea of what insurance costs as well. Although if you've been in my other classes, we're having an insurance crisis in the state. So not necessarily. Which makes me like this language more. That, you know, the buyer and seller pre-agree that PITI is going to be the cost. So if my, you know, client's fire hazard insurance costs 4 times what we expected it to be, guess what? The seller is bound to paying it. And the buyer's not coming out of pocket on a property they can't yet occupy.
I don't understand why it doesn't have any value.
It does, but
You
it's
know
like,
what you're saying, whatever it is on that day.
but they don't know what their loan rate's going to be on that day.
But you know
And they
there's
don't know if they're
cars
going to
there.
get a credit or purchase price reduction. You don't know what it's going to be. They can't order their insurance on day 1. Yeah, we don't even know if the property's appraised. We don't know what the fees are on day 1.
So we don't know what. it's
So on
gonna
day
be
0,
that
we
day.
have no idea. Yeah,
Yeah, what it is today or whatever.
yeah,
We
exactly.
don't know.
Exactly. We can generally estimate a good, you know, a reasonable,
Yeah, I mean, there's always
Estimate.
PITI.
yeah, but the PI is always going to be very different. You don't know.
So whatever it is on that day, but that doesn't count for value.
There's no idea for what it's going to be on that day.
That'd be something.
I mean, I don't know. In this market, if I'm a buyer, I'm not executing anything based on PITI today.
I can see that. It was-
I'm not, I mean, I'm not estimating because my rate could go up a point tomorrow, right? I'm not doing that. As a buyer, seller, you're asking me to live in my home after I own it. I'm in a rental property. I have 2 costs, living costs now, the home I own and my rental property until I can live in my house. Why on earth would I leave it up to chance and pay for the seller to live there part of the time? I'm not doing that. I mean, I make money, but not that much money, right?
Kristen, isn't this risky?
No.
No?
It's very common. Like I said, I've never had an issue with it. If it's under 30 days, it's
Okay.
considered a lot less risky. A lot of times though, the lease back, even when you tell everyone, bottom line is the seller needs that 30 or 45 days.
Okay.
Yeah, so you just do what you do.
Which brings me to my question.
Mhm.
Remember Hugh Hefner?
He had a life estate.
Life.
That's different.
So is it, but
Nope.
that was a lease back?
No. Life estate is actually a weird, like special instance that's
Oh, it's not
recorded.
the same. then.
Mm-mm,
Okay,
not at all.
There's an answer to the question.
Yeah, not at all. It was, yeah, not at all.
That was the most famous one.
Yeah, that's a life estate, but I like that you tied that in.
Well, it fit.
A life estate is a consideration in property purchase where you're like, I want to buy your home so badly, but I know you're elderly, you don't want to move, you can't do this. A lot of times it happens when someone's in poor health and elderly. And So the person buying it is like, you can live here for the rest of your days, and that's actually recorded on title. I have a feeling a lender would not lend on a property like that. Probably a cash buyer or someone who's got a private banking relationship. Obviously, someone who's buying the Playboy Mansion
there's some big
has some
players.
cash. Yeah.
But I have another question.
Mm.
This is a Josh Flagg story. Sold a house, had a lease back. The lady who's leasing it back has a maid. The maid drives a crappy car. She parks it in the parking lot. Josh says you cannot park that in there. It's not his house. Right? It wouldn't be the buyer's house yet. If the lady lived there and she's got a legal lease back, doesn't she have,
She's got a lease, but her maid doesn't have a right to park in there.
oh,
Yeah, she doesn't have an agreement to use the home, the maid.
well then, good for Josh Flagg.
Kristen? just-
Yeah.
Sorry, last question. So if I already have the buyer sign the counter offer, can I just send, I haven't sent it yet to the seller, but can I just do an addendum with your language? Just addendum.
You can,
one
but
with your
your client needs to initial next to what they've already signed, and they need to sign this. And whatever you, yeah, they need to initial next to where you added the addendum on there, on your counter offer, and then they need to sign this, then you can send it together, yes. Okay, no more questions, no more stories, I need to get through this.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right, so we talked about this. You know, you need to make sure that the language up here at the top is correct. And like I said, if you are executing an SIP or RLAS after an accepted offer, it's going to be other amendment to existing terms. On that amendment to existing terms, you're simply going to say, see attached, either SIP or RLAS. Okay. All right. You'll have the property buyer and seller names, and you're going to identify for how many days, okay, after the close of escrow or to a certain date. So very much like RPA, we cannot control when something gets accepted. Like we also cannot control when something closes. It is more often than not that closings are delayed by a day or two. Sometimes through no one's fault. Things just happen. Things fall through the cracks. Okay. The less busy the market is, more often we have, or, you know, more common it is to close on time, but it is very, very common to close a day or two late. Okay. It can be common to close even later than that. So for a seller that needs a lease back, they generally are not looking for a finite date. They are generally looking for a certain number of calendar days after the close of escrow, because the whole purpose was they needed that money for whatever it is they need to do next. But there may be a reason for it to be a finite date. I don't know. Maybe the buyer's like, okay, seller's like, I don't know how much time I need. Okay. But the buyer says, well, I have to move in by this date. So let's just make it that date. What if your seller only wants to pay for how many days they're actually there and they don't know? So sorry, the buyer's doing you a favor so that you can have your money and figure out your plans just like you. They have plans as well. We can't have an undefined term in a contract. We need to know the date or the number of days following the close of escrow. So that is non-negotiable. Okay. And you'll see agents argue for it. You'll see them word stuff like that. It is not up to a certain number of days. It is a certain number of days or a finite date. Okay. It's not optional. The seller doesn't get to just, you know, say, I'm going to stay here for 25 days and then on day 3 leave and say, okay, give me the rest of my money back for that number of days I did not stay there. No, it doesn't work like that. All right, consideration. Blank dollars per day or blank. Okay. So what does the or blank mean? Well, it could be a flat dollar amount. You know, so like, what if you really want to execute an RLAS or SIP with your counter offer or offer? So you're just estimating really high and everyone seems to be okay with that. Although I think that's going to be a rare chance that everyone agrees to. Let's just, you know, the seller is going to be like, oh yeah, I'll just pay more. Well, seller, again, buyer's doing seller a favor. So seller, you want them to be comfortable with it. Maybe you have to overpay a little bit. So you could do a flat rate. That's what this box is for. But typically we use a dollar figure per day. Okay. At close of escrow, and by the way, all prorated costs. Okay, prorated means costs that are based on longer terms. So we know that taxes are annual or semi-annual, right? We know that insurance is either annual or semi-annual, yeah? Principal and interest is not, or I guess it could be looked at that way, but in all real estate prorations, it is based on a 30-day month. Okay, and it's so that we can add all of these figures together and get a number, right? How can we add things that are based on annual or semi-annual versus things that are based on daily or monthly? We have to add these things that are calculated in different ways so that we can get the actual carrying costs, the per diem carrying costs. The way we do this is we break everything down to a daily per diem. So if I know what something costs for 1 month, I divide that by 30 days. If I know what an annual cost is, I break that down by 12, and then I divide that down by 30, right? 12 and 30. It's not 365, it's not exact. Oh no, I'm telling you, this is very, very important. 30 days is the rule, guys, in all real estate transactions, 30-day proration. So it doesn't matter if it's February or if it's December with 28 and 31, it's based on a 30-day month. Everything's based on a 30-day month. Okay. And then you, Malika, asked about what's going to happen with, oh no, you didn't ask this, but where does that money go? Well, the safest way to do it is that seller shall deposit said funds with escrow holder prior to close of escrow. That doesn't actually happen. It comes from their proceeds. Seller holds this money back to make sure that the buyer gets, or escrow holds the money back from the seller's proceeds to make sure that the buyer gets it. Okay. At close of escrow, all consideration will be released to the buyer or held in escrow. Well, I think that that's the buyer's money, so it should be transferred to the buyer. Okay, so I would not be checking this box. This one. So, yeah, I would not be checking this box. So Malika, when you asked about a deposit, a security deposit, I think it's not on here because it's under 30 days. You would have to write it in on other terms and conditions on an SIP, but it is part of the RLAS. Okay, and why is because it's not a tenancy. But can you have a security deposit? Absolutely. So you would copy language here and you would say, you know, seller to provide buyer with a security deposit in the amount of blank dollars to be held by escrow. And then you have to say, you have to define the terms upon which that deposit can be released. Yeah, so I generally say upon both agents, or, you know, I say upon buyer's agent, I'm usually the one writing this and I'm usually buyer's agent if I'm doing this. I don't care if the seller's agent fucks it up all day long, great for me. If I'm the buyer, yeah, yay, we win. I like winning. Buyer's agent to verify condition and notify escrow in writing with instruction to release deposit back to seller. Does that make sense? I, as a buyer's agent, take it on myself so that it just gets handled.
But I didn't understand when the agreed amount of money
For the security deposit, yeah.
for the security deposit for the 1 month, let's say 29 days, they are saying. So they should pay to the buyer, right? For that 29 days, whatever amount it is.
Not security deposit, no. Security deposit, I ask escrow to hold because it's a security deposit is not actual proceeds. I'm not giving the buyer, I'm not inviting problems into my life. Let's give the buyer money, the people who just became very cash poor and want to buy fancy furniture even though they don't have money for McDonald's anymore. Let's go give them money that doesn't belong to them and then ask for it back later. That sounds like a really bad idea, right?
Right.
Yeah, we ask escrow to hold it.
Yes, that's the security, but the seller should
Oh,
pay for the
yes,
feedback.
yes, the seller, well, that's up to, but that's negotiable between buyer and seller. But yes, the seller does typically pay the buyer for the lease back and it's usually at a rate of their actual PITI. Yes. Okay, so back here. Whoops. Late charge NSF checks. This does not apply because again, I don't invite problems into my world. I don't invite problems into my client's world. We've already said that escrow is going to take the whole dollar amount from the seller's proceeds and give it to the buyer at the close of escrow. Okay. Right, we've said that here in section 2. So section 2B would not apply. I don't see in any world for a lease of under 29 days, why a seller would be giving checks to a buyer for the lease back. We don't need to do that. We have escrow who can just take care of that for us. And we know it's done and we're not in court, which makes me happy. Don't worry, you'll end up in court even on deals you're not involved with. It will happen eventually. I think I'm joking, I'm not. Seller obligations for condition of property, maintenance. So on a residential lease after sale, it's negotiable, but under the SIP agreement, the seller is going to maintain the property. Utilities would remain in the seller's name. Basically, they're taking care of it as if it's still theirs. They're just paying the buyer for the time that they're there. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Kristen, don't
yes.
shoot me, but if it's a condo, none of that would pertain, pool, landscaping, it would just be the
No.
HOA.
Yeah, but it just, I mean, stuff that doesn't apply either way.
Okay,
So the
But with a condo, like I said, the PITI includes HOA dues. So it's PITI plus HOA dues. It
Okay.
needs to be prorated. Yes?
That's a silly question, but SIP, the seller stays, is paying the bills. When does that transfer over in the buyer's now?
When
when
the
they
buyer
move
takes
out?
possession.
So automatically.
29 or fewer
transfers
days.
out of maintenance?
No, they have to call and transfer them just like they would at a normal
and does
close
that
on a
take an
sale where there
hour?
is no lease back.
How long does that take to transfer?
I don't know. It depends on the utility company.
Oh, well. I don't know, we argues.
I mean, it's just a phone call. I think most time you can do it online now. It only becomes problematic when you have them shut off and then have to have them shut on. Then there are delays.
I grew up with a lot of fighters.
Delivery of possession fee. I don't know why a seller would pay a buyer a delivery of possession fee, maybe like a cleaning fee or something like that. I have no idea, but the seller is expected to provide the property in the condition they would have been expected to at the close of escrow, clean and free of personal items. So I'm not sure why there'd be a delivery of possession fee. Utilities, seller will pay for all utilities and any related utility charges and the following charges, blank except blank. So if a seller has a pool or jacuzzi or something like that, you might put that in here, or landscaping. Yes.
So what do we do when we have situation of seller lease back with the final verification as an agent, when we do a final?
You just do the final walkthrough,
When?
whatever your contract says, 5 days prior to close of escrow.
Okay, but if
Your
they're
co-
staying longer as a lease back, how do I know that the?
You
property
don't,
is-
and that is not, this is a different part of the transaction. Verification of property condition must happen 5 days or less prior to the close of escrow unless you've written otherwise in your residential purchase agreement. It is not debatable. And I, as the agent, I'm not, when I'm negotiating a lease back, I'm not inviting problems into my world. If it is under 30 days and there's no security deposit, I don't need to verify any condition of anything. I've already done that as a real estate agent. Now it's basically a short-term rental between the previous owner and the new owner. Though I negotiated the terms of that because I had to, so that I made sure they got paid at the time they should, I am no longer involved. This is no longer my problem. I can accommodate, but I'm certainly not there to verify condition. If the seller left it in condition that is not acceptable to the new owner, the buyer, they can take them to court over it. Yeah, this is not, my deal is done. I no longer have any part in this. I'm no longer covered by my air and emissions policy to conduct any business in relation to anything outside of the transaction. I play a rule of thumb of good assistant. I want to help my client because I value that relationship, but I'm also not an attorney. I'm also not covered by my errors and omission policy anymore on a transaction that's closed. What can I do? Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I can call their agent and ask if they will just take care of it for you. Or maybe we can put you in touch directly. You have their telephone number now, since you've closed escrow and they're technically your short-term tenant, right? Also, I have the name of a few good real estate attorneys that I can email over to you.
So we don't need to do a security deposit.
On under 29 days, you don't need to, but you can. And, you know, it's up to you how you want to write in how it gets released. If you write in that you as the agent are going to take responsibility for that and instruct escrow when it's safe to release that security deposit, then you are covered by your error and omissions policy because it's a condition of our transaction we wrote into our contract. Does that make sense? But with an SIP, we don't typically have a security deposit. Mhm. Oops. Okay, sorry. So utilities, keys and other items included. So the way that this is written is that seller still has to give keys and other items to the buyer to access the property as required in the agreement at close of escrow, unless this box is checked and it says after the time the seller is to remain in possession. Well, I think it's very important that the new owner has the keys, because what if there's a massive flood? It's their homeowner's insurance, it's their house. They are the ones who need to spearhead anything that's going on. What if something happens, you know? They are even though they are a short-term rental and not a true landlord tenancy, they own that house. They still have obligation to maintain it in extreme situations. They should have keys and all access to the house, all codes, all keys, all everything.
They're playing landlord more or less.
They're playing at landlord. Okay,
This is probably a silly question, but title does transfer at the time of closing, correct?
yes. Yeah, you can't close without deed being recorded. Insurance, the seller's personal property, including vehicles, are not insured by buyer. So a lot of sellers, they're used to having homeowners insurance. Well, after title is transferred and the buyer is now the new owner, they no longer have any insurance coverage there. So it's if you are involved in a leaseback and you're representing the seller, you'll need to tell them they should get renter's insurance, even though they're not technically renters if it's under 29 days. They're no longer covered by anything. Okay. We already talked about other terms and conditions.
Is there a way that they, for that short term, that they can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on to the residential lease after sale unless anyone has any questions specific to the SIP. Nope. Guys at home, did it change over to the residential lease after sale?
Yes, it did.
Okay, great. Who said no? Oh,
It just
a
did.
delay. The office internet is slow, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Funny, when you talk, it's on Zoom, it's delayed. Like you can see you talking and then it comes in after.
yeah. All right, residential lease after sale, very, very, very similar. Only this document's like a full-on lease agreement because guess what? 30 or more days, it is a legal lease. There is a landlord tenancy relationship created. There's a tenancy. So you'd fill it out just the same. Okay, only it's going to cover a lot more information. So it's who's living in the house, right? We're getting a lot more specific because when we have a tenancy relationship, the landlord and tenant need a lot more information so that they can resolve any issues. Okay. Nothing's changed from the SIP to the RLAS so far here. But when we get to escrow payments, now we have security deposit. It's pretty much a given, and not a given, it's an option. It's a boilerplate option here that the buyer might want that. Okay, so you're saying, what is escrow going to pay? Well, remember, I said I don't want escrow to give the newly cash poor buyers any money that doesn't belong to them and set them up for failure. Okay, so security deposit is not necessarily one I'm putting in here because it's talking about escrow payments, not if there's a security deposit, just how it's going to be handled. Okay, so escrow payments would be rent for the entire lease term, right? Because again, I don't want to set anyone up for failure. Why am I going to have the seller send checks to the buyer to create issues? Things never show up in time. People are moving, people, like, things get crazy around this time. Let's keep it simple. Okay. Or other, blank per escrow instructions shall be paid out of seller's proceeds. Rent, tenant agrees to pay per month a dollar amount, okay? Now, this gets tricky because we don't know that they're gonna stay whole months, and that's fine. Remember, we can figure out what the per diem rate is. So if the lease back term is going to be 45 days and our rent is $10,000 per month, we would take 10,000 and divide it by how many days? 30, no matter what, whatever that dollar amount is, we would apply that to the remaining 15 days past the 10,000 we're already collecting for the full first 30 days, okay? All right. It is, however, important that you fill out the rest of this, because even if the buyer and seller don't want this, what happens if the seller doesn't leave? What happens? They have to go through formal eviction. And so the buyer needs an actual lease agreement to protect them. Right? So the rest of this is legitimately exactly like the residential lease agreement, which I'm going to be teaching tomorrow. Not lease agreement. Yeah, it's going to be just like a lease agreement, which I'm teaching tomorrow. So I'm not going to go through the rest of this. I just wanted to go through the parts of this that are different from the SIP. If you understand the SIP, you can fill out the parts of this that are particular to the residential lease after sale. Tomorrow, we'll go over the lease agreement, and once you understand that, you'll be able to fill out the rest of this. Yes.
Just a quick question. It says rent for the entire lease term in 3. If
6 or more months,
Okay, what if it's, okay.
I would go ahead and click other, and I would type in what I wanted.
Oh.
I would just say rent for the entire lease term. Yeah. So the state of California, I don't know, like, some of their documents are really well done. And then some of them, I'm like, who is advising them? When we use this RLAS, we don't want the seller in the property in perpetuity. We're not planning for 9 months from now. No, we did this because we had to get the property, right? You don't need a residential lease after sale if you bought an income property or even a single family that you plan on renting. There's an existing lease agreement and you just write a new one when it's time to renew, or you let them go month to month. So the way that this is set up, like, oh, we want this. No, nobody wants this. We're just filling it out to basically protect the buyer in the case that the seller becomes a squatter. Okay. Any questions at home on this document? No. I hope you guys never have to deal with that. All right.
So when we fill this form out,
Mhm.
both together, we should fill this.
No, it's one or the other, SIP or RLAS. Never both. Because what is the identifying criteria between the two, guys?
Number of days.
Number of days.
But how it happens,
One.
29 days, they rent, like, a stay in the property.
Well, then you would basically go change the law. It's called the police for trespassing. If you want them there, you can write up a formal lease, because once it becomes 30 days, you're going to need a lease. Does that make
Right,
sense?
yeah.
But the buyer's lender will probably have an issue with this. I don't know that they'd find out, but they'd be committing loan fraud if they knew this going into it.
Christine, good morning. This
John, good
rent
morning
cap-
or afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry, I was late.
It's okay.
This rent cap addendum, is that the new one? Is it for the
Rent
lease?
cap
agreement?
addendum is, it's in relation to a state law. So even though we have rent control that applies to some properties in some cities, Los Angeles and Beverly Hills and West Hollywood included, not all properties, the state has imposed a rent cap on some properties, not most of them. It doesn't usually apply to single family or condos, but I still think that there may be a limit on what you can raise the rent annually on any renter, but I'm not positive about that. Yeah, it's basically just a disclosure, John.
Yeah, okay, okay. You're gonna go over them tomorrow?
Yeah, I teach tomorrow leases.
Thank you, yes, that's good.
All right, guys, I hope you have a great day.
Bye.
You
Bye.
too.
You're welcome.